I saw The Wishing Well, what really struck me was that it's a wonderful, complete night of theatre. It's a very important story. It deals with part of our history we don't contemplate very often. It takes us back into an era that we should know more about. And I felt that was very, very strongly researched. It wasn't just a superficial rendering. It was you felt the people who put this together had lived in that era and knew what they were talking about.
The Wishing Well is a truly epic story about one woman's journey. She begins in England, comes to Australia. It's a 20-year journey through life, right from the period where the Depression was about to begin, right through to the 1950s with the great immigrant boom.
The most important narrative deals with Edith's relationship with her son Tim, who has a hole in his heart, and that's based on Helen's uncle Bernard, who lived in the 1930s and 40s. The central conflict that occurs between these characters is that Edith needs to keep him alive at all costs and restricts his life accordingly, and that clashes with Tim's need to live life to the full, and he falls in love with a young girl called Sarah, and Edith tries to put restrictions on this relationship, which leads to terrible conflict of emotions between the two. And the play also revolves around the narrative of Edith's relationship with an Italian migrant called Guido, who she meets when he's assisting building the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the early 1930s. We also deal with the story between Edith and Victor, who is a crazy Romanian migrant who arrives in Melbourne in 1948 and sets up a restaurant, and they call it the Wishing Well, and Edith comes in on the venture, and we get a fantastic sort of look at the migrant boom of the 1950s and the explosion of culture that occurred in Melbourne at that time.
So it's very affecting, the immigrants who came here, what they had to go through, the hardships and pain they endured. It's also a very emotional story, a family story. I found that very affecting.
It's really about dysfunctional parental love. And in that respect, it almost reminds me of King Lear. It has an epic quality. The other thing is that it's a wonderful representation of the social development of Australia from the 20s. That there are elements there that an audience will find quite surprising. The New Guard, for instance, the history of migration, which was really happening then. But most of all, it's one person's journey, which I think is always very, very appealing.
And so the whole play is a love story between mother and child, of Guido too, if you like, and Victor for his restaurant. So we follow these love stories, and I hope we realise by the end that love is our greatest weapon in life against all that might come at us.
It's delightfully circular, so the structure is intriguing. It flips backwards and forwards through time, but never in a way that is confusing. It gels, and I think it's always a joy to watch a piece of theatre come together like that, so that it's full of little surprises and little connections, and the audience gets the chance to make those sort of aha discoveries.
The other thing that appealed to me most strongly was it's a fantastic ensemble piece for a group of actors, and this is a really good cast, very strong cast, very impressive, and a very imaginative production. The way the whole thing flowed and was envisaged, there's a very strong directorial aesthetic to it that supported a fantastic cast of actors.
The signature of this production was the use of the actors. We worked out one day that 8 actors played over 100 characters, which sounds mind-boggling, but they were wharfies, they were rioters, they were unionists, they were kids in the street, myriad people, restaurateurs, clients of the restaurant, you name it, they played it.
This must be a gift to actors and a good director. It lends itself to a really good ensemble. You had a sense of the actors really relishing these parts.
It was a refreshing piece of theatre that I would have happily taken someone in their 90s and someone who was 12 years old to see.
So the image of the Wishing Well of water, of liquids, it pervades the whole play, being by the sea, crossing the sea to come to Australia. And we just began to find it a very unifying image. And it also assisted the design, this circular well around which a shell, this closed-off shell, was built.
The set is a superb metaphor for the play itself. It may take a while to realise what that set is, that it's a giant nautilus shell, but it's almost like a game of snakes and ladders, the progress along that spiral, because the story itself, of course, is a spiral.
Although The Wishing Well was originally produced in the round, it'll work equally well in end-on theatres because of the size of the theatricality of the piece and the epic nature of the story.
I see a lot of theatre. That's my job. That's what I do. And I came away very excited by this. It was a great piece of writing. It was a great story. It was multi-layered. It appealed to my my intellectual side as well as my emotional side. It's one of the few that I actually responded to the point where I would actually go and buy a ticket to see that.
This is an enormously entertaining play, although at its centre it is a tragedy. It's a heart-rending play. And there is an epiphany, thank heavens, at the end of it. This is not to say that this is a heavy play in any way. There's a lot of humour and a lot of joy in it, but it will move you.
So altogether, the combination of the story, the emotional content, the direction and the acting, I thought this is a marvellous piece of theatre. It should be seen by many, many more Australians than saw it here in Brisbane, and it deserves a very wide audience, and I do hope it gets one.